always try to label you, but I was never one to perform nothing else.
Knowledge is knowing that Frankenstein wasn't the monster. Wisdom is knowing that Frankenstein was the monster. Knowledge is knowing that Frankenstein wasn't the monster. Hello, Internet!
Press button A.
Film theory, where, like the cast of Fame, I'm determined to live forever, and wear delightfully 80s leg warmers while doing it. And so, in my quest for immortality, you can bet my eye was drawn to the new movie Victor Frankenstein, starring the epic duo of Charles Xavier and Harry Potter. No, not that version of Xavier. There you go. Now, when it comes to film adaptations, Frankenstein is about as classic as it gets, with films going back over a century. But many of the things we associate with the tale of Frankenstein actually got their start on celluloid and not cellulose. That's film and not paper. I use the highfalutin words for the alliterative effect. That's the type of quality writing you can expect here in film theory, ladies and gentlemen. For example, the Doctor's grave robbing started with the film. Neck bolts, grab your popcorn, it's in the film. Hunchbacked assistant, film. In fact, in the book, he has no assistant, and the name Igor isn't mentioned once, which is a huge loss for Mary Shelley since she totally missed out on Danny Rad's adorable British accent.
Do you realize how significant this is?
Oh, you're so cute, Harry Potter. It's weird to be saying that about a guy who is literally the same age as me. I think. Is he the same age? I don't even know. He's younger than me. There's you and your magical youth. Anyway, digressions aside, with zombies all the rage these days and the new movie out now, it got me thinking, why don't we look at pop culture's most famous zombie, Frankenstein's monster, and the science of bringing a human back from the dead? I mean, times have changed since Mary Shelley's book. Is this work of science fiction still more fiction than science? What sort of challenges would the good doctor face if he were to try and do these sorts of experiments in real life? Is it possible to reanimate the dead? Surprisingly, is yes. And it may shock you to know that the Walking Dead are around you right now as we speak. I mean, the real Walking Dead, not the TV show. Carl! Let's start off with harvesting organs from dead bodies. And for that, we turn to the Big D. No. Not quite. Why are you even guessing? There is no chance that you're ever gonna... No, it's not that! You're never gonna get it. Big D020858, the official code for tissue and organ harvesting as recognized by the National Library of Medicine. Earl, I don't know why you insisted on shoving all these images onto the screen. I told you there was no chance that you would get it. I appreciate the enthusiasm. Anyway, the phrase organ harvesting is a medically recognized term with its own official code. Who knew, right? I'm sure a bunch of pre-med students are currently typing in the comments section right now that they knew. Well, good for you guys. On that note, here's a joke for you. How do you know when someone's pre-med? Don't worry, they tell you. Oh, shots fired! Bow, 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 bow. That's me doing an air horn sound effect. Anyway, the process of harvesting working organs from a deceased person and giving them to living people who desperately need them has been around for decades, and today the majority of donated organs actually come from the deceased. In fact, I myself am a registered donor, so better call dibs on my body parts before I go. I can already start to see the fights breaking out in the comments section over who will get my dearest spleen. And not only are transplants from the deceased common, like Dr. Vic, who gathers his parts from multiple quote-unquote donors and puts them all into one body, it is impossible to take organ deceased donor to a symbiont. One such case was recorded as early as 1986, where a 12-year-old girl was given a heart from one donor and then a liver from another. But alright, I know what you're thinking. I'm just talking about internal organs. Frankenstein was an amalgamation of a bunch of limbs, and limbs are a whole different thing. And you're right, kudos to you for being able to tell the subtle difference between a leg and a kidney. But here's the thing. Yes, they're difficult, and yes, they're rare, but limb transplants do happen. After a failed hand attempt in both 1964 and 1998, the first limb transplant to see long-term success was performed on January 14, 1999 in Louisville, Kentucky. A man named Matthew Scott had lost his left hand in a firework accident during the 80s and had a new one attached. A few short months after his surgery, he threw the first pitch in a Philadelphia Phillies baseball game with his new hand. Since then, there have been hand and arm transplants almost every year since. And the first double leg transplant was performed in 2011 2011. And depending on when you watch this, literally days ago, the most extensive base transplant was completed successfully. Look at us covering topical news stories. In short, lid transplants are still rare, mostly because they cost an arm and a leg, figuratively and literally. But it's definitely... That was so bad. That was so bad. But it's definitely not science fiction. This is a regular procedure with a reliable success rate. So the idea of Frankenstein's monster being stitched together from multiple different human corpses isn't as outlandish as it might seem. But okay, we're talking about stitching limbs onto live bodies. What about what I teased at the beginning of the episode? Bringing someone back from the dead. I mean, in order to perform the classic line, "It's alive! It's alive!" had to be dead to begin with, otherwise it's just kind of redundant. So is it possible to reanimate the dead? To understand that, we have to understand what actually happens to your body when you die. There are two types of death recognized by modern medicine. Well, three if you count legal death, but it's not like Frankenstein's monster was trying to avoid his back taxes or skip jury duty or anything. So that one doesn't really apply here. Let's just talk about the other two. Brain death and clinical death. Brain death is defined by a complete and irreversible cessation of brain function. If you've ever heard of a patient being in a persistent vegetative state, brain death is actually a couple steps below that on the ladder. Patients in a persistent vegetative state still show some amount of brain activity. Their eyes can sometimes track moving objects, they can often breathe on their own, and even swallow food unassisted. Between a vegetative state and brain death is what's called a coma. Comatose patients generally don't respond to any stimulus at all, and won't be able to swallow on their own. However, despite this lack of response, their brain still does show some activity. Comatose patients and patients in persistent vegetative states still have some chance of progressing back to awareness and even fully regain consciousness. But a brain-dead patient is past the point of no return. Their brain shows no activity, and as a result, their heart probably won't be able to beat on its own. They are literally being kept alive by machines. Very few brain-dead patients are kept alive on life support for more than a few days, since it's so expensive and there's literally no physical way for them to ever recover. Generally, after a patient is declared brain dead, the family says their goodbyes, the plug gets pulled, and clinical death begins. Clinical death is defined as when the heart and lungs stop functioning. Usually we inhale and oxygen enters our bloodstream and consequently gets supplied to all the cells in our body. At the same time, all our cells expel waste and other nasty stuff, and this gets carried away from us when we exhale. No longer supply oxygen and nutrients to the cells, then they won't have the energy to function. And if we no longer exhale, then the cells have no place to put their waste. This means that cells lacking any energy source begin to weaken while rapidly accumulating all sorts of acidic waste that they can't get rid of. Eventually, their membranes wither and they explode, obviously dying in the process. This is called autolysis. And different cells die at different rates. Brain cells tend to be the first to go, needing only 3 minutes before they start showing signs of damage. While things like kidneys and livers can last up to 20 minutes, and muscle cells can literally last for days. This issue becomes a huge point when doctors harvest organs from deceased donors. How long have the donors been clinically dead, and how damaged have those organs become? Because brain cells are so fragile, clinical death is usually followed by brain death. Notice, though, that I said usually. Unlike brain death, you can come back from clinical death. Remember, clinical death is defined by the cessation of the body's vital functions, like heartbeat and breathing. And while yes, those systems might go down for a while, with prompt enough attention, those systems can be brought back online. And here's the really crazy thing. Believe it or not, doctors during certain procedures will intentionally induce clinical death in their patients, perform the surgery, and then reanimate their patients right there in the hospital room. They are literally inducing death in people, working on them, and then bring them back to... They even use electric shocks from defibrillators. It's alive! They don't shout that, though. That would be really concerning. I would be very shocked if that was my gun. Defibrillators, a whole lot easier than harnessing the power of lightning bolts. So let me tell you about this procedure. For certain surgeries, doctors sometimes use what's called deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. They drain all the blood from a patient's body and replace it with either a saline or potassium solution, cooled down to somewhere around 15 degrees Celsius. At this point, the patient's heart stops beating and they stop breathing. they are considered clinically dead. Then the doctor performs the surgery, replaces the blood, and resuscitates the patient. Provided the whole thing lasts less than a half hour, many patients are able to survive this procedure with absolutely no brain damage. This is because when our organs get cooled down by even a few degrees, their metabolic rate slows down so they use less oxygen and produce less waste, which means they can go much longer before showing signs of damage. Individual organs ready for transplant are kept cold for this very reason. Brain cells can go from lasting only 3 minutes to safely lasting 30. Some have even gone as long as 60. Livers can be bumped up past the 12-hour mark, and kidneys can go to something like 35. Every so often you hear a news story about a skier or a toddler being trapped under ice for something like 40 minutes, and somehow they're able to survive and make a full recovery without any damage, despite the fact that they didn't have any oxygen for that entire time. Well, this is why. Despite having your blood drained from your body and you being put to death, it's actually a fairly safe procedure. Most famously having been performed on a pregnant woman in 1994 when an aneurysm had ruptured in her left lung. She survived the surgery and successfully delivered a healthy baby a few months later. Let me translate that for you. That child was dead and then brought back to life before he was even born. That's as hardcore as you can get. That's gotta be like some sort of record. Long story short, is all of this a technicality on the definition of death? Admittedly, yes. Though your heart's stopping and you no longer breathing seems like a pretty strong ruler to measure your living and dead against. But the biggest moral of the story here is that as long as the brain is still working, the rest can follow. Could Dr. Frankenstein actually bring a patchwork of dead body parts back to life? No, and certainly not during the time period depicted in the film. But medical science today has made it possible for dead limbs to find new bodies and for doctors to reanimate the dead. The only missing link now is finding a way to transplant a living brain into a dead body. Oh, and we still need a nifty use for those neck bolts. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut. Like the cast of Fame, I'm determined to live forever and wear delightfully ladies leg warmers. Wow, that's a Freudian slip. You know what really bothers me the most about the Batman's villain, Mr. Freeze? Before he went all Sub-Zero, he was a doctor named Victor Freeze. So why on earth would he choose the name Mr. Freeze? One, you're not really hiding your identity all that well by changing the spelling of your last name. And two, why did you go down in title from doctor to Mr.? At least take credit for all that dissertation research you did. Welcome to Film Theory, where what's cooler than being cool? Science. I also would have accepted ice cold. Now, true loyal theorists will remember that last year I was invited by Bill and Melinda Gates to make a video inspired by their annual letter, a yearly tradition of theirs meant to outline an underrepresented global crisis that needs to be addressed. Their letter's job is to broaden awareness of the problem and call all of us to do our part in making the world a better, healthier place for everyone. Last year it was a letter about superpowers for good, so I talked about Deadpool. Obviously. This year's letter is focused on providing solutions for global health issues related to women and children, and so I wanted to theme my video around Batman. Seriously, that might seem like an odd logical leap, but hear me out here. First, the people who are on the front lines doing work in fields like scientific research, funding, and on-the-ground treatment are the closest things this world has to superheroes, literally going out to save lives every day, just like Batman. And it's worth noting that these people aren't even billionaire playboys, except I guess for Bill Gates himself. He probably qualifies. Just like Batman, these people are making a difference. Since 1990, the lives of 122 million children have been saved by the efforts of these everyday heroes. And it's not just for children either. Since 2010, HIV infections are down by 5%. Back then, only 7.5 million people were getting treated. Now it's over 17 million. Deaths from malaria are down a whopping 29% in that same amount of time. The work of these real-life superheroes is making a difference, and our support in whatever way, from monetarily to donating our time to just spreading awareness, is taking down diseases and quite literally changing lives and making the world a better place. But seriously, what does any of this have to do with Batman? Well, old Willie Gates has challenged me to make a video on the subject of finding treatments for some of the world's most aggressive and incurable diseases. Got me thinking about Mr. Freeze. Now, if there's one villain that needs to be rebooted, it's this guy. And no, I'm not just saying it because of Arnold Schwarzenegger's endless stream of terrible ice puns from Batman and Robin. Okay, well, so maybe a little bit because of that. But more so because Mr. Freeze is really an anti-hero. He's a scientist whose wife contracts a rare fatal disease called McGregor's syndrome. So he cryogenically freezes her to keep her from dying and will now do absolutely anything to find a cure. I gotta be honest, I feel for the guy. So today, let's help him out. Bottom of the McGregor syndrome mystery. It isn't a real disease, but can we find a real-world version of McGregor's syndrome to see if this mad scientist's plans will work, or if the chances of saving his wife are an absolute zero? Ah, I can make cold puns too, Arnie.
Very nice.
But alas, just because I can doesn't mean that I should. So, to start, what does the Batman universe tell us and show us about McGregor's syndrome? The first time it's alluded to is in an episode of Batman the Animated Series from 1992 with that epic music and incredible art style, which explains how Victor Freeze turns evil when he attempts to research a cure for his wife Nora's disease and is forcibly stopped. The disease itself isn't named McGregor's syndrome until a few years later in the film Batman and Robin.
My vines have a crush on me.
No! God, please, no!
That film also gives us our first clues as to the nature of the illness. When Batman and Robin inspect Nora's cryotube, you can clearly see that it has 4 stages. Later on in the movie, we see that Mr. Freeze has found the cure for the first stage, and it's some sort of weird glowing Gatorade. And that's honestly about it, because we never see Nora suffering from the disease at all. She's frozen and lifeless throughout the movie. Much like George Clooney's performance. Heyo! Shots fired. Bam, bam, bam. That's my makeshift air horn. Instead, some of our best clues come not from the movies or animated series, but from Season 2 of Gotham, in which we see Victor Fries. Yeah, for some reason they changed his name, so now it's pronounced like French fries. Much better for hiding your identity there, Vic. Actively working on the cure for a very sick, but also very alive Nora. In these episodes, we see her cough up blood, have difficulty breathing, and generally seem to be pretty darn frail. Still, not a whole lot to go off of. But when most others would walk away, that's when I get really intense. In the direct-to-video movie Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero, Freeze learns that Barbara Gordon has the exact same rare blood type as Nora. So to save his wife, he tries to kidnap Barbara so he can perform a fatal organ transplant. And digging even deeper across the DC universe, we find that Nora isn't the only one suffering from the disease. In the CW series The Flash, Francine West reveals that she also has McGregor's syndrome, and that it's common among ex-drug addicts. That's a huge clue, but I'm still not done. The biggest hint of all comes from Arrow, where William Tachman, aka the Clock King, is determined to have McGregor's syndrome, which is described in the episode as So recap, it's genetic, attacks the lungs, has 4 stages, is treated with glowing goop, can hit other organs, can potentially be solved with a transplant, and is more common among drug addicts. That's a lot of information, so maybe, through the process of elimination, we'll be able to get to the bottom of Nora's disease dilemma. And spoiler alert, it's not lupus. Don't worry, Dr. House, I checked. Let's start with the obvious solution. Lung cancer. In Batman and Robin, the main conflict of the movie is that Nora is in an advanced stage of McGregor's syndrome. Whereas later on in the movie, we learn that everyone's favorite butler, Alfred, except you, Mr. Beauregard, you're the best, has just been diagnosed with stage 1. Now, as many people know, cancer progresses in 4 stages. From the first, where the cancer is small and contained only in the location of the tumor, to stage 4, in which the cancer is spread to many tissues in the body, making it much more likely to be fatal. Combine this fact with the blood that Nora coughs up, and it's not too hard to make a strong case for lung cancer. But that is where the similarities stop. Riddle me this, theorists. What would the cure be a liquid that glow... Wait, that's just a reference to the radiation used during chemotherapy. Then what about the organ transplant from Sub-Zero? I guess that would just be her getting a new lung to replace the one that's too damaged from the cancer. What about that obscure moment from The Flash? Cancer isn't more likely to be an ex-drug addict, so... wrong. Actually, since lung cancer is more likely in drug addicts. Drug addicts are statistically more likely to be addicted to cigarettes. Between 80 and 95% of alcoholics are found to smoke cigarettes. And a study found that those undergoing treatment for heroin addiction smoke cigarettes a staggering 97% of the time. And yeah, even Alfred too. Early portrayals of the character showed him smoking a pipe, so him being in stage 1 actually makes a lot of sense. You know, come to think of it, that stuff from Arrow fits too. Genetics, multi-organ failure, lungs filled with liquid, all of it comes with advanced stages of lung cancer. You know, come to think of it, we can also rule out other deadly lung diseases like pertussis and tuberculosis because they're highly contagious. When Batman and Robin learn that Alfred has McGregor syndrome, they don't exactly put him into quarantine or start wearing surgical masks. They're still in full contact with him the whole time, just as Victor is in contact with Nora throughout the Gotham episodes. Speaking of those Gotham episodes, by the way, when Victor comes home to find Nora coughing up blood, he keeps asking about a medication called forminerol, later freezing a drugstore to harvest the entire supply of the drug. Now, forminerol doesn't exist, but there is a suspiciously similar sounding drug on the market called formoterol. Formoterol is a long-acting bronchodilator that clears a person's airway and makes it easier for them to breathe. So, I guess it's lung cancer? I expected it to be a bit tougher than that. I mean, I guess you could say that lung cancer isn't rare, but there are plenty of weird, unique strains of cancer out there, so... Damn, I thought we would pull some really obscure, rare lung thing. I had this whole episode planned, eliminating things one at a time, building to the big final twist, but, I'm really used to this. My 7-paragraph structure is just thrown out the window. I don't know, I guess I can just end the episode now. But hey, that's no wait. What's interesting about Mr. Freeze's situation isn't the disease itself, it's the cure. You see this woman, Nora Freeze, Tube Girl? Yeah, her. Mr. Freeze froze her to stall for time until he discovered a cure, except here's the thing, this girl right here in the tube, she's already cured. That person that you're seeing suspended in this tube right now, in that present moment, she is cancer-free. McGregor syndrome-free. No joke, Mr. Freeze has cured her. And here's how. It's a treatment called cryosurgery, and it literally means curing cancer by freezing the cancer cells directly. Specialized surgeons use super targeted cold rays in a cryoprobe. Just think Mr. Freeze's cold ray just micro-sized and freeze the cancer cells to death. I mean, think about it. Cancer is just a bunch of out-of-control cells, and freezing them does basically the same thing that it does to that bunch of lettuce that accidentally got frozen in your fridge. When it thaws, it's limp and dead because all the cells have broken down. The same thing happens to the cells in your body after they've been frozen with liquid nitrogen. So, Mr. Freeze, in deep chilling Nora, has actually killed all the cancer cells in her body. She's officially cured. Huzzah! Except there's a catch. Of course, doctors performing cryosurgery target the cells they're looking to kill with these icy cold blasts by using very tiny cryoprobes. Mr. Freeze, just encased Nora in ice, like her whole body. According to those episodes of Gotham, Mr. Waffle Fries is using liquid helium to freeze his wife, and liquid helium is like the coldest of cold substances that humanity can create, at a temperature of minus 452 degrees Fahrenheit. For comparison, the liquid nitrogen doctors use a balmy negative 320 degrees Fahrenheit, a full 130 degrees hotter, if you can consider hotter and colder when you're talking about negative hundreds of degrees. So yeah, he not only killed all the cancer cells, he also killed all Nora cells in the process. And if you think curing cancer is hard, curing I just made my wife into a human fudgesicle is way harder. When asked about it, biology professor Michael Hendricks at Yale University stated that the technology required to bring someone back from a completely frozen state, quote, does not yet exist even in principle. It's also something we've covered here on Game Theory. You can't just freeze people and bring them back to life. So the worst part here is that Mr. Freeze had the cure, or at least a pretty solid treatment, the entire time. If he had been a bit more precise with that freezing gun of his, he could have helped treat Nora's lung cancer himself, but his hasty solution has actually doomed his wife to death. Man, irony is cold, but hey, that's just a theory, a film theory, and before I wrap things up, one final big thank you to Bill and Melinda Gates for not only asking me to once again join their campaign for spreading awareness of global health issues, but for the good work that they're doing in the world through things like their annual letter. It'd be easy to sit on your throne of $84 billion and just, I don't know, do whatever things super rich people do. Live in a gold-plated house, or fly lie in your gold-plated plate, or whatever else you might want to gold plate, since that's what I assume rich people do all the time. But actually going out and doing something positive for the world is just awesome. So before you leave this video to watch whatever Let's Play is on next, or fail clip compilation that may be waiting in your playlist, do the world a favor by clicking the link in the description to read Gates' annual letter. If nothing else, it'll get you to think about the challenges people in less fortunate parts of the world have to live through. So, educate yourself and be a force for good by clicking that link. Because, if I can get really real here for a second, true success in life isn't defined by how much you earn, but rather by how you make the world a slightly better place than when you first entered. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you all next week. Sure, Meta Movie's tagline is "The world has enough superheroes" because this powerful alien symbiote appears to be an evil, man-eating menace. But have you ever stopped to consider that Venom may actually be the victim in all of this? Give me 15 minutes, or honestly whatever length this video winds up being, because who knows, the actual length of this video isn't finalized until like 5 steps after I record this. Whatever it winds up being, stick around, because I think I'm going to be able to change your mind. Hello Internet, welcome to Film Theory, the show that's cringier than a Peter Parker dance break. Okay, maybe not that cringy, but close. Today we're talking about Venom, one of Spider-Man's most popular villains because, let's face it, who doesn't love themselves a dark doppelganger storyline, am I right? For those of you who need the quick rundown, Venom is one of several alien symbiotes to go around possessing human hosts in the Spider-Verse, giving them special abilities like shape-shifting, increased strength, and normally long tongues. In the new movie, journalist Eddie Brock is investigating the Life Foundation, an organization whose experiments with the symbiotes are a whole lot more sinister than their super generic name implies. When the investigation goes awry, Eddie's body merges with the symbiote, unleashing Venom, and his ultimate ability, awkward one-liners. In all seriousness, though, there's an interesting side to Venom that no one has ever really stopped to consider, that he's the victim in all of this. And I don't mean that in the big, bad, evil science corporation did experiments on him or anything like that. I mean that for all the death and destruction that Venom may bring, the symbiote is really just a lost, confused, and scared entity. That Eddie Brock might be the thing that's actually infecting it. But to truly understand why, we first have to understand the nature of parasites. See, once you strip away all the alien goo nonsense, Venom is the dictionary definition of a parasite.
I have a parasite.
An organism that lives in or on another organism, its host, and derives nutrients at the host's expense. Take, for instance, the case of the parasitic wasp or weaving spider, both of which live in Japan. The female wasp drops her eggs onto the back of the spider, which hatch and then become a larva. In larval form, the baby wasp takes control over the spider, causing it to build a web. A web that is nearly 3 times stronger than any web the spider would ever build for itself in its normal life. It sounds a lot like Venom, and that increased strength he gives to his host bodies. Good.
It amplifies characteristics of its host.
The reason they do this is that the larva will soon be helpless in a cocoon. It needs a stronger web to protect it. A web that's heavier duty than what a spider would typically build. Once that web is built, the spider host is killed off. It's no longer useful. Man, just like a parasite.
Auto
Always
drive
an
down
only
the
web. Damn, thank you, man. But for as similar as a spider parasite might be to Venom, there's actually a better fit when it comes to the real world. Toxoplasmosis gondii, which I've talked about very briefly years ago in one of the earliest and cringiest episodes of Game Theory.
That worked.
Basically, toxoplasmosis hijacks the brain of a rat, forcing it to hide out in the open where it can be found and eaten by cats. Bad news for the rat, but great news for the parasite, because once it's inside the cat's stomach, it can morph into a cat-compatible form and then also reproduce inside the cat's digestive system. After reproducing, it gets pooped back out by the cat and gets into the water supply, where it's once again consumed by rats. It's like a really gross version of the circle of life. Everything touches will be your home. Now, you'd be totally forgiven if none of that immediately reminds you of Venom, but in both cases we're presented with a parasite whose behavior and abilities change based on the thing it's infecting. Symbiotes affect Peter Parker and Eddie Brock and Cletus Cassidy very differently, just like or inside of rats, or even inside of a human. You see, toxoplasmosis can also affect humans. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to cause you to lay down in Mr. Fluffy's dish in the hopes of him one day eating you, but studies have shown that this could have other effects on the human brain. Specifically, it might be linked to an increased risk of schizophrenia. According to researchers at the Stanley Medical Research Institute, quote, cat ownership in childhood has now been reported in 3 studies to be significantly more common in families in which their child is later diagnosed with schizophrenia or another serious mental illness. And furthermore, the researchers' finding, again, suggests that cat ownership in childhood is significantly more common in families in which the child later becomes seriously mentally ill, end quote. Further stating that an explanatory mechanism may be toxoplasma gondii. Now, before everyone rushes off Mr. Fluffy up for adoption, I'd like to point out that there are more than 40 million people in the U.S. who are currently suspected to be infected with the toxoplasmosis parasite, and only a tiny fraction of those are diagnosed with full-blown schizophrenia. Even if the link between the two is scientifically valid, remember, it is far from certainty, the chances of getting a schizophrenia diagnosis are still incredibly low. Just try to be hygienic and make sure that you're washing your hands after you empty the litter box. You're doing that, right? Right? Anyway, the link between toxoplasma and schizophrenia is really interesting because in a lot of ways it parallels Eddie Brock's relationship with the venom parasite. For instance, one of the main symptoms of both schizophrenia and the symbiote is psychosis, a failure to understand reality and a higher propensity for hallucinations. And this is something that is immediately apparent from the trailer of the new movie. In that trailer, Eddie looks into a car window and sees the reflection of Venom staring back at him. This should be physically impossible. The shot is showing us things as Eddie sees them. In this case, he's seeing things there, so prone to hallucinations, hearing a voice call his name, Venom's voice commending him, etc. Now wait, I hear you saying that isn't a hallucination. Venom is literally talking to him. And sure, that's true, but it is all still happening in his head. That conversation with Venom is the textbook definition of auditory hallucinations, and one of the clearest signs that Eddie might be headed off to schizophrenia. But why does any of this matter? I mean, sure, Venom and toxoplasmosis might share some similarities, but even I, with my over-the-top theories, won't go so far as to say that the symbiote is just a hyper-evolved form of this cat parasite. I don't need another Deadpool as Ernest Hemingway moment on my hands. No, the reason I bring up the parallels here is that whether we're talking about parasitic wasps, parasites that form rat brains, or fictional alien parasites, one thing connects all of them: a need for survival. It's easy to forget, but parasites are fighting for survival just like any other living creature. They're using whatever techniques that they have at their disposal. It's why the wasp gets the spider to build a stronger web, so it can reproduce. It's why toxoplasma forces the rat to get eaten, so it can reproduce inside of the cat's skull. We see him presumably eat a guy that just witness. If you need to eat a human to survive, why wouldn't you just track down victims to eat in, I don't know, dark, secluded alleyway?
This year has been a train wreck. But since 1792, through wars and pandemics, people have voted early, by mail, and even social distancing in 1919. Where's my voting healthy?
Instead of, I don't know, the middle of the street where 6 people, yes, 6 people, count them, are watching, one of whom appears to be recording the whole thing on a cell phone. Behaviors like this result in Eddie, and by proxy Venom, repeatedly getting attacked by thugs, having to run away, having to fight for their lives. In Spider-Man 3, Venom, being evil, gives himself the worst enemy possible, Spider-Man. Any way you slice it, this behavior is simply not conducive to helping Venom survive. It is instead doing the exact opposite and putting him at active risk. So what is really going on here? Well, it's all explained by toxoplasmosis. You see, changing rats' behavior so that they get eaten by cats helps the toxoplasma survive and reproduce. Inducing psychosis in humans, however, does none of those things. It is a loss for the human, mental issues, but it's also a loss loss for the toxoplasma, who can't move on from the human to the cat's digestive tract and reproduce because, well, there just aren't that many man-eating cats out there. The problem is toxoplasma didn't evolve to exist in humans. It evolved for the cat-rat style of life. The fact that it also happens to affect humans is entirely accidental, an unintended side effect. This relates to a field called zoonosis, infectious diseases that begin in animals but can eventually be transmitted into humans, like bovine spongiform encephalopathy, probably better known as mad cow disease. There's also bird flu, and probably the single most notorious example in history, the Black Death in 14th century Europe, which was spread by rat fleas that went on to kill hosts. One of the reasons that these kinds of diseases can be so fatal to humans is that they didn't evolve to affect humans. They evolved to affect some other animal, and the fact that they can infect and kill humans is just the accidental side effect, which is usually a pretty bad evolutionary strategy if you're a parasite. But this is what seems to be happening in the case of the symbiotes. We're so used to seeing venom in other symbiotes, like Carnage and Scream, attaching to human hosts, that you might make the mistake of assuming that the symbiotes naturally exist to bond with humans. But that's not the case at all. Canonically speaking, the symbiotes were originally created by the primordial deity Null in order to slaughter the celestial space gods from the beginning of time. You remember Nowhere from the first? Well, yeah, in the comics, technically a celestial head where people are parking their boats. Anyway, it shouldn't come as a big surprise that an organism created in a separate part of the galaxy with the intent of bonding with space G-Sci would probably experience unintended side effects of trying to bond with a human host. It's a learning process, which might explain why Venom's behavior sometimes seems erratic at best and completely against his own survival at worst. In fact, if anything, it might be the symbiotes themselves who are affected more by this bonding process. You often see the Venom symbiote as something who takes control of humans, but the link works both ways. Though the symbiotes were originally created with evil intentions, one of the perks of their program is that they take on some attributes of their hosts. In many cases, symbiotes feel that their existence has no meaning, and one of the reasons they bond with a host is to give their lives a simple purpose. This is one of the reasons why when Venom first bonded with Peter Parker in the comics, the thing it did was to go out at night and fight crime. The meaning for its own existence came from Peter Parker, who spends most of his time fighting crime. However, this had an unintended side effect. The symbiotes who had bonded with benevolent hosts infected the symbiotic hive mind with traits such as nobility and honor. The good symbiotes eventually rebelled against Null and imprisoned him at the center of their artificial planet in the Andromeda Galaxy, eventually creating the agents of the cosmos as a force not of chaos but for good. If you needed proof that symbiotes weren't designed with humans in mind, that seems like a pretty good indicator. The fact that noble humans were essentially able to reprogram an evil alien symbiote hive mind to be benevolent seems to indicate that the symbiotes are not prepared for the effects of what happens when they bond with organisms, in this case a human, whether they're meant to over a new leaf and rebelling against their evil creator, or simply threatening to eat a dude in the middle of the street, turning into a turd. Venom is on an unfamiliar planet fighting for his own survival, and one of the only weapons he has at his disposal is the imperfect mankind. He's scared, he's threatened, he's doing his best to survive. The trailer for Venom seems to be trying to sell us on the idea that Venom is the one who's corrupting Eddie Brock, but who knows? In the end, Eddie might just be the one who ends up purifying Venom. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And you know what I thought to myself when I first saw Venom? Wow, that guy is not taking great care of his skin. I mean, look at this, you guys. That is more than a little bit of sunburn and overly enthusiastic exfoliation. I guess not everyone gets themselves Dollar Shave Club every month, which is a shame since I think a lot of this movie could have been resolved if old Eddie Brock over there might have cleaned up his act a bit, did a little visit to the orthodontist, maybe treated himself to some manly pampering. Dollar Shave Club, our sponsor for today's episode, goes beyond merely its namesake of shaving and makes stuff like the calming body cleanser. Clearly something that Venom has not been treating himself to recently, because if he had, he wouldn't be looking so rough around the edges, shall we say. On the other hand, maybe he's having a really bad day with razor burn. I know, razor burn sucks, bro. That's why I'm telling you that a little Dollar Shave Club Easy Shave Butter will really take the edge off, so to speak. So you'll be back to breaking hearts instead of breaking basically everything else in this movie. I relate to feeling like a monster sometimes.
It's no secret that there's a lot at stake in this upcoming election, from dealing with the effects of the pandemic to acknowledging climate change, and that's why I'm so excited to cast my ballot for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
1-800-CONTACTS, we're here for Allison, whose prescription just expired. Don't worry, Allison. With our express exam, you can easily renew your prescription online. Order your contacts now and get fast free shipping plus our best price guarantee. 1-800-CONTACTS.
Okay, so I've got some title ideas for the next Spider-Man film. That's great. Can't wait to hear them. Well, you know how every one features some play on the word home? I think these are going to be right on brand. Well, then go. So, we've got another Marvel movie for me? Yes, sir, I do. Coming up with original ideas for a series with over 20 movies and... I choose you! Film theory! Use mind blow! We'll see how effective it is. Don't change that YouTube dial, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, you are on the right channel. Today, we're covering the upcoming Pokemon movie, Detective Pikachu. A film that made the ballsy choice of having video games' cutest mascot voiced by Deadpool. Man, has it worked. These trailers are setting the internet on fire with this bizarre cognitive dissonance that they're creating. Cognitive dissonance, just so you know, is when you have conflicting thoughts and attitudes existing at the same time. Like when you smoke, but you know that it's bad for you. Or here, where you think, oh, what a cute little Pokemon, and then here's a creepy man voice popping out of your favorite Pika. They've been the first trailers in a long time to actually make me feel optimistic about the prospect of a live-action video game movie, even if all the Pokemon are purely fuzzy. Or look like they just lost a ton of weight. I mean, apparently Charizard's been getting himself on the Weight Watchers. Look at those rolls! Now, Detective Pikachu features an entirely new main character, Tim Goodman, who explores Rhyme City, a completely new location that we've never seen before in any other Pokemon media, aside from the game of the same name, which, to be clear, I will be ignoring for today's theory. Maybe I'll cover it later on Big Theory or after the release. No, Tim's thinking thereafter, he stumbles across a Pikachu that can talk and considers itself to be a detective. Beyond that, though, this talking Pikachu is a complete mystery, considering he just woke up with amnesia. Memory loss, you say? You know what that means? This Mon has clearly got himself some history, which means a theory. So, well, the obvious answer is probably that Pikachu is somehow connected to his missing father, or that is his missing father. I had a more exciting idea pitched me on Reddit by Simple Beans. That this Pikachu is Ash's Pikachu. Yes, Ash from the anime. As different as this movie seems, is there a chance that this could be a part of the same canon timeline as the TV show? Could the secret of Detective Pikachu's forgotten history actually be that he served as Ash's faithful companion for over 1,000 episodes of animated splendor? It sounds like an outlandish idea, and heck, it probably is, but the more you dig into the countless details that are in these trailers, the more and more all makes sense. Let's do this Detective Pikachu style. I choose you! Corkboard of evidence! Clue number 1, Rhyme City. Now, as I already mentioned, Detective Pikachu is set in a city that we've never seen before in the previous mainline Pokemon game or TV show. However, it would be a huge mistake to assume that this season takes place in another world. We get several indications in the trailer that though Rhyme City is in a new it's set in the same Pokemon universe that we're already familiar with. In Tim's Nest, we see that it has a poster for Sinnoh Championship 24, an obvious reference to the region that's introduced in Diamond and Pearl games and TV seasons. A more detailed reference that we're all shown Sports Club, another reference to a region that we're already familiar with from the Johto League seasons of the anime. While Ash's journeys have never taken us to Rhyme City before, they seem to conclude that we're still in the same established Pokemon world. Still, it would be a huge leap to assume that just because we're seeing the names of familiar locations that were also in the TV show. After all, the video games have the exact same locations and regions as the anime, but the games and anime follow completely different canon. The video games don't have a character named Ash Ketchum who travels around Kanto with Rock and Misty, for instance. And even within the games themselves, there's already a multiverse, one with Mega Evolutions and one without. For more information on that, I go way in depth in this episode of Game Theory. However, the trailer gives us another big hint about a link between the Detective Pikachu movie and the TV show, leading us to clue number 2, Jigglypuff. From one brief moment in the trailer, microphone to reveal that it was actually a partner the whole time.
Control, we are pursuing the suspect.
Sober guy at a frat party. Carrying around that iconic microphone isn't something that's inherently part of a Jigglypuff's DNA. It is something that is specifically tied to one unique character in the anime. A character who now seems to be appearing in the trailer Pikachu. And if one Pokemon from the anime managed to find its way into
Officer down! Officer down! Control, please bring back up to my
Now,
location.
let's focus a bit more on our main
Drones
character.
are on their way to the
Now,
suspect.
we don't have too much information about how to start that amnesia, but we do learn once we get back. So you're talking Pikachu with no memory.
Be advised, we are on the trail.
According to the original creators of the game, was a rip on the trope of detectives using pipes. A way to make Pikachu feel older or harder, but still keep him friendly. And while Pikachu itself doesn't appear in the anime, from what I can find, we do have plenty of scenes over the years of Ash's Pikachu eagerly drinking honey. Clearly, the character likes human beverages, especially beverages that are caffeinated, so making the jump from tea to coffee to an older, more adult film would make perfect sense. The only other thing that we know about him is that, despite having amnesia, Pikachu remembers having dealt with
We are in pursuit. Again, in pursuit.
Ash's Pikachu never truly battled Charizard in anime, but both Ash and Pikachu had to deal with all sorts of misbehaving difficult Charizards in the past. So this would actually line up very well with our theory that they're all the same. It's a similar story here with Mr. Mime as well. In the trailer, Pikachu seems to have a solid understanding of how to deal with
Okay, this is bad. Are these winners always going to be after me?
Until you let them, yes. They are hopefully is.
and finally, Luke the Fifth. Let's
Control, we are pursuing the suspect.
Let's go.
The trailer makes it very clear that while Tim can understand what he's saying, no other right out there. Pikachu it's an awful lot like how Pikachu communicated with Ash throughout the anime, even if he's not voiced by Ryan Reynolds.
Why build a pillow tower for nasal congestion? Try new Afrin Dental. Unlike pills, it unlocks your nose in seconds and lasts up to 12 hours for a more restful night. Afrin.
And we don't just have to infer it off of the way that Ash talks about Pikachu, we've actually seen them speak directly to each other before. In the 20th Pokemon review, next Pokemon I Choose You, we actually learned important facts about how humans and Pokemon, and more specifically how Ash and Pikachu are capable of understanding each other. In the movie's big climax, we actually hear a Pokemon talk. It's because
Pursuing the target. Over.
now, to a lot of people, this seems totally out of place, and not just because Pikachu sounds like a rejected character from Rugrats. No, it was because Pikachu talk. It's not like it's meow.
No matter what trash you throw at me, Flo wins in the end.
But here, it doesn't feel like Ratchet is
Suspect.
talking the same way that meow does, as if it held up a microphone to Pikachu during this moment, it would probably sound like very sad. It's exactly the same narrative device that detectives use. They always see things not as they literally are. understand me. No, that's been so long. Let's review our core board of evidence last night. We know that Detective Pikachu's location of crime scene exists in the same world with no locations. You know, just like Johto and Sinnoh. More specifically, the presence of this Jigglypuff, there's a much greater likelihood that this movie takes place in the same universe as the one where Jigglypuff constantly is trolling his friends. We know that Detective Pikachu, just like Ash's Pikachu, loves caffeine and has experienced dealing with both Mr. Mimes and Charizards. But most importantly of all, we know that both of these
Auto drive now enabled. Auto drive now
insane.
disabled. Danger. Vehicle in
Might at
critical
first
condition.
seem like the
Please exit immediately.
draw from just a few minutes of trailer footage. This trailer is packed with so many clues and hints that all can be pointing towards a connection between Detective Pikachu and the original species. Sure, it all may seem like circumstantial evidence, but none of these details are instantly reactive. In fact, one of the most impressive things about this trailer is how much detail they do manage to get in. So is Detective Pikachu an older, more grizzled version of Ash's Pikachu? Did we crack the case here? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. But for now, the court board makes it a pretty compelling possibility. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And... Alright, Pokemon HQ, let's take our most popular character, bring creative and loving detail, cast the internet's favorite voice of sarcasm, adhere to established canon, and drop in a lot of Easter eggs to fans of this series. Movie, I choose you! Meanwhile, over at Sonic HQ, yeah guys, let's do what they did, but change the image of the character. Hello, Internet. Welcome to Film Theory, the show that's just like Detective Pikachu. Hey, so basically, it's good. Going in for a tactical run.
Auto drive now enabled.
Now, in all honesty, I saw last night.
Auto drive now enabled. Danger. Vehicle in critical condition. Please exit.
And as an experience, I'm still probably creeping on kids at night, but more so than any of that, Detective Pikachu seems to have provided the final pieces of evidence needed to confirm one of the longest running and coolest Pokemon series that's been kicking around since the first generation of games way back in the 90s. In the process of solving the mystery,
Immobilizing the suspect.
father, the case for sublimation has huge implications about the true nature of Pokemon. So pull out your magnifying glasses and put on that new stock cap. Case begins way back in 1998, year when everyone thought that the
Auto drive now enabled.
2 years earlier, 1996, the world demanded what it was.
Ready to ram the vehicle. Over.
Pikachu is now your star.
Auto drive now disabled.
Other minor changes were made to make closer. But other than that, it's all over again. You see, there was one
Send emergency vehicles to my location.
Listen, you eventually find Mewtwo. Oh, but here's the important change. In Pokemon Yellow, a new wild Pokemon can be found from expansion Ditto. Transform Pokemon, a little blob of purple goo unique for its ability to shapeshift using DNA. As his Pokedex entry says, capable of copying an enemy's genetic code.
Instantly transform itself into a duplicate of the enemy.
Seems like it's just a minor shift in
Auto drive now enabled. You have reached your destination.
Pokemon would appear in an area where Mewtwo was being created using genetic experimentation. Perhaps there was a way that Ditto
Auto drive now disabled. Danger. Vehicle is
maybe
critical
Dittos were
condition.
the
Please exit immediately.
experiments that didn't make the cut until science was finally able to create the perfect Mewtwo. Seems like it's a bit of a stretch. All they did was change one small location, but the closer
Vehicle in critical condition. Please exit immediately.
connection between the two only got stronger. Players noticed that, and in Yellow, the only other small location for Ditto was the Cerulean Cave, where Mewtwo winds up hiding out after his escape expansion. So wherever Mewtwo was, Ditto's seemed to follow. It was enough to get theorists like me to start getting closer, and boy howdy. The similarities between Mew and Ditto are undeniable. In the games, they have the exact same way of being winning. They're the
Danger.
only two Pokemon
Vehicle
that
in
are
critical condition. Please exit immediately.
enough. Even their coloration seems to match. Sure, Ditto is usually purple and Mew is usually pink, but sometimes something games, Ditto is pink. And in Detective Pikachu, the Ditto was definitely much more in the pink spectrum. But there is no denying that all the time, both Ditto and Mew have shiny forms that are both the same shade of light blue. And this is all just the superficial stuff. If you dig further into the game's data, even the numbers tell the story of how they're connected. Each Pokemon has base stats that govern
Damn,
its
son.
HP.
Well, we did what we did, but we did.
Mew is a regular jack of all trades when it comes to his base stats. He has equal base stats across the board. If you look at Ditto's base stats, you'll find the exact same thing. Identical base stat distribution across the board. Now, all of Ditto's are 52% lower than Mew's, but it's exactly 52% for all 6 of the main stats. The distribution of those statistics is identical. It's almost as if Ditto were a weaker copy of the original Mew. And there's the point. Ditto isn't Mew, it's an imperfect copy. It's the result of failed cloning experiments. Cloning experiments that eventually give rise to Mewtwo. Leave the little pile of DNA Ditto over there in the corner, wandering around looking for stuff to do.
Seems your mate took
All
quite a
of it
fancy
adds
to
up
wound
to
up in hospital. They won't be available for some time. If you're feeling clever, you might consider recruiting a paramedic to the team. It's a brilliant way to shorten that hospital stay and get your teammate back online.
By any singular piece of Pokemon media. And then came Detective Pikachu. Let's lay out what we learned from the movie. Yes, we're gonna have some minor spoilers here. Not the big twist of what happened to his father or anything like that, but for the smaller mysteries that are uncovered along the way, I'll give you
Auto drive now enabled.
use that kind of quick way, and/or click the subscribe button to get notified of every time we have a cool theory like this one. Help this channel get to 10 million subscribers, please. It would be great to get that glorified paperweight. Alright, we all good? Everyone ashore who's gone ashore? Fantastic. Within
These are the memories Cohen took from us. A child's birthday, time spent with friends, the first kiss, or the big day, the homecoming game on the first day of college, or graduation. Dreams of stories this
Within the movie, it's mentioned that Mewtwo is a genetically altered clone of an ancient Mew, confirming everything that we just talked about. But the movie goes one step further. They explicitly say that Mewtwo disappeared from the Kanto region 20 years ago. Now, Kanto region is the first name of the place where the anime began. Interesting coincidence, but nothing earth-shattering. It's that 20 years detail that really matters. You see, Detective Pikachu is coming out just over 20 years after the release of the Generation 1 game, and exactly 20 years after the release of Pokemon Mewtwo Strikes Back, the first ever Pokemon movie, which was all about, you guessed it, Mewtwo's escape. It's confirmed by the screenwriters in an interview they did with Polygon. Quote, the implication, which the screenwriters confirmed to Polygon, is that this is the same Mewtwo from the canon universe. End quote. I mean, I gotta quibble with them saying the canon universe. It's like, which canon universe are you talking about? But hey, I will take it. So we have an established and confirmed canonical connection between Detective Pikachu and the wider Pokemon franchise. The writers went on in another interview, this time with Screen Rant, to confirm that they were aware of the Ditto Mew theories when working on the project. Quote again, so we went into the history of Ditto, we looked at all of those things, and we kind of wanted to leave it up to the audience for people that are more familiar with the story. We didn't necessarily feel that we wanted to go too much into that, but all of those things are a factor. I think the deep origin of Ditto is a provocative question that we wanted to hint at. Because of the interaction with Mewtwo's genetic material, it didn't seem like there was a sensible connection between Mewtwo and the Ditto. So we have writers who've been approved to work within the official canon who were also aware of the possible connection between Ditto and Mew. So now the question is, how does that actually translate to what we see on screen? Well, in the movie, we see Ditto playing a role. By the end of the film, it's revealed that Howard Clifford, out from Rhyme City, is our villain. The man is out to hijack Mewtwo's mind so he can gain the psychic Pokemon's powers for himself. In order to do this, he uses his partner Pokemon Ditto. But this isn't any ordinary Ditto. You see, Howard's Ditto has the ability to transform at will, and in the film's climax, we see him do exactly that. He transforms into a Machamp to beat up Tim, then transforming into a Cubone to give him a few knuckle taps to knock him off the building, and later transforming into a raging Charizard. Heck, his Ditto can even transform into humans, which is a whole other discussion for another day. All of these behaviors, though, directly conflict with what we know about a normal Ditto's abilities. We're told repeatedly throughout the animes and video games that Ditto can only copy things it sees. In gameplay terms, this means that Ditto can't just transform into any random Pokemon. It always has to copy whatever enemy is facing.
As the hunger strike of 6 migrants currently being held at the Kennington Oval enters its
canon has established via various
statements indicating
Ruby and Sapphire, Emerald, Diamond and Pearl, Black and White, Ditto.
Rearranges itself structure to
international
transform
agencies
itself
have called
into
the
other
situation.
shapes. However, if it tries to transform itself into
Join us
something
on
by
TV
relying on its
tonight
memory,
as we
this
look at
Pokemon
migrants,
manages to get
detention,
details
and the
wrong.
prospects for a
Ditto
solution.
rearranges its cell structure to transform itself. However, if it tries to change based on its memory, it will get details wrong. It has the ability to reconstitute its entire cellular structure to transform into whatever it sees.
This is further supported by what we see in the anime. The first Ditto we meet in the anime are the ones belonging to the copycat Duke. And in her episodes, we learn that Ditto are only capable of transforming into Pokemon that are physically present, and that this is a limitation of the species as a whole. Likewise, all the other episodes that have Ditto only show Ditto transforming into Pokemon that are present or he can copy. Across all of our research, there were 0 canonical cases of Ditto randomly shape-shifting at will without having a Pokemon nearby to copy. So for Howard's Ditto and Detective Pikachu to cycle between forms so rapidly and so precisely,
Okay, Google. Okay, Messenger. Okay, Google.